start, the first thing we always talk about is the ingredients that go into make our whisky. And we use 4 ingredients. We use barley, we use malt or malted barley, we use corn or maize, which is the same, and we use a good supply of water. Now for the first part of our tour, we're going to be talking mostly about barley and malt, and we'll talk about corn a little later on. In this area here, going back to 1825, this would have been a hive of activity. This is where the farmers came. They came here directly with their horse and carts and dropped off the grain here. They'd have that weighed and they'd receive a voucher for that, and used to take the voucher around to the building just around the corner with the chimney. That was our distillery office. And they'd hand in the voucher, they'd get their payment and get a couple of glasses of whisky as well as a thank you for all the hard work that they've done. Because most of the grain here would have been brought in at the end of the harvest time, and that's sort of from the middle of August to the end of September. And if you look at all the buildings around us here, they were all used as grain stores. So you can imagine the quantities that would be required to keep distillation up throughout the winter season. Now in making our whisky, we cannot make the whisky just from barley. We need to turn some of that into malt. So I'm going to show you how we do that at the next stage. So we're going to make our way over to the maltings and the killings. So we'll head over this way here. Side as well. If you'd like to come to the side too. So we're going to come a little bit closer. You might see the screen as well. So ladies and gentlemen, this building is the maltings and the killings. And the word kiln, it comes from an old Irish word for an oven. And we've 2 kiln ovens here, one just here on my right hand side and one just behind you on the left hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the barley into malted barley. And there's 3 stages in doing this. Now the first stage would be the steeping of the grain. So what we do is we steep the barley in water for 1 to 2 days and we bring up the moisture content. The second stage then is called germination. That means to grow. We're going to trick the barley into thinking it's back in the ground again, and we want it to start regrowing. Now this damp barley would be spread out upstairs on the malting floor. And I've one of the malting floor tiles here, and the side that you're looking at, you see there's tiny little holes. This is the side that the grain will be resting on. So you have tiny holes so the grain can't fall down through it. Now on the reverse of the tile, you've got large holes because eventually the heat is going to rise through this side here. So what we do is we spread the barley out for 4 to 5 days. It thinks it's in the ground and it starts to regrow. And in order for barley to grow, it needs 2 things. It needs warmth and it needs moisture. And that's why it grows best in springtime. Because in Ireland, the ground is heating up after the winter time, so that's where the heat is coming from. And we have the moisture. We call them here the spring showers or the April showers. Now the only thing is, we get our April showers, January, February, March, April, May, sometimes June, July, August, so we've no shortage of moisture. So now the barley thinks it's in the ground, it starts to germinate, and then after 4 to 5 days, we stop that growth by using heat from the kiln fires. So the heat will rise through this side here. Now this will be an important stage because this is where you have, generally speaking, the first difference between Irish whisky and whisky from Scotland. In Scotland, in the kiln fires, they would use peat or turf. And if you like turf, that gives off a lot of smoke. So in Scotland, the smoke rises and that dries out their malting barley. So in Scotland, when the barley is malted, it can have that smoky context and that continues into the flavour. So that's why a lot of Scotch whiskies, or whisky from Scotland, have that bit of smokiness in the flavour. What we would have used here is anthracite, and that's a smokeless coal that we used to import from Wales in the UK. And when you light the smokeless coal, just the heat from that would rise, and that would dry out our malting barley. So when our barley was malted, it didn't have any smokiness, and that's why if you try any of our whiskies, you don't get the smokiness that you normally get in a lot of whiskies from Scotland or Scotch whisky. So that's the first difference between Irish whisky and whisky from Scotland. So our next stage
Interesting.
now, we're going out towards the grain store, and if you look over on the left-hand wall, you're going to see a large pair of shoes or boots. So we'll just take a look here, and you can see they're big platform shoes. They would have been worn by people working upstairs because they needed to protect their feet from that rising heat. So you see the soles are quite thick, and sometimes people think platform shoes were invented around the 1960s, 1970s. We had them here about 100 years before anybody else.
Oh, wonderful.
So we're going to make our way out this way towards the grain store.
You know, automated sort of where they use that in the stacks.
Do they?
To blow all the slag off the stacks. They send guys in machines like that with a shotgun. Blow all the slag off. Yeah. They're sitting there all day, blowing it up. At least they used to about 10 years ago. I don't know what they do now. But they wore those wooden painted shoes because it was always
Got a little bit of sunshine, but you see.
power plant stacks. Yeah, walk in front of you.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, as we walk through here on your right hand side, you'll see some old agricultural implements that would have been used by the farmers down through the years. And on your left hand side here, you can see some scenes of the harvesting of the grain. So we use 100% Irish barley, and a lot of it will be produced even in the area that we're in. So most of our grain comes probably within about 2 hours drive from the distillery. So the climate in Ireland is perfect for producing good quality grain. So we're going to make our way, we'll head along this way here, if you'd like to follow me this way. That's the thing here, when you go into one building, it's quite nice and sunny, and if you look at the far side, it's Charlie. Yeah, 1966, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So originally you had the Jameson distillery in Dublin, Powers distillery in Dublin, and Lipton distillery here, and three companies merged in 1966.
Middleton distillery.
So ladies and gentlemen, if we look at the building we just came out of, the grain store, you can see that there's lots of windows in these buildings. And the reason for that is when you're storing grain, we like to keep it nice and dry, but there's always a danger of fire explosions in these buildings. So in summertime, all of these windows will be open, and that would be to keep the grain nice and cool, and of course that would also help with ventilation. And the round black discs on the building, they're called iron tie bars, and they were put in to strengthen the building, because at the end of the harvest time, you could have up to 250 tons in weight on each floor, so that would strengthen the building. The building on my left hand side, this was the first building built on this site. This building was built in 1794 as a woolen mill, and the woolen mill only lasted 8 years and it closed down. It wasn't making any money, and in 1803 this building then became a military barracks, and the reason for that was we had the starting of the Napoleonic Wars, and we thought Napoleon's forces might pay us a visit. Now that never happened, and the military moved out, and in 1825 the Murphy family, they're from Cork, they bought this building and the whole site and put in their first distillery. Now if we look to my right hand side, if you want to come over this way here slightly, you can see over the hedge, and that is our master distiller's cottage. And our master distillers have lived there down through the years. In 2013, the master distillers retired. His name was Barry Crockett, and he was working here for 47 years, but he was born inside in the cottage. And his father before him was also the master distiller. Now our master distiller today is Mr. Brian Nation. He doesn't live there anymore. That building is home to the archive department. So a lot of our historical documents will be kept inside in the cottage. Anyone like to guess how many rooms in the cottage? Or 20? Someone said 20? It was 22. Yeah, so originally it was 22 rooms. Just leave off, yeah. So we're going to go up towards our water wheel. Yes, yep. So ladies and gentlemen, our water wheel was built in 1852 by a company called Fairbairns. They were based in Manchester in England, and it's 22 feet in diameter, and this was the main source of power right up until 1975. And this water wheel is powered by the Jungorni River. That comes down from the mountains. It gives the distillery a good supply of water, and some of that is diverted across the archway, across the mill race, and it powers the water wheel from the top. So I'm going to bring you inside and I'll show you the main function of the water wheel. If you'd like to follow me, we'll head along this way. I have to mind my head when I come in here too. I'd be afraid I'd hit off them.
So it's not working right now, yes?
No, it's not. But it actually does turn. We can divert the water. It still comes through. So it does turn from time to time. But we don't generate power off it now. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the mill building. And the what we have here is, years ago we would have had maybe about 5 or 6 people working in this area. And one of their responsibilities would be to keep all these cogs and wheels oiled and in good condition. Because the water wheel was our main source of power. It would have ran all the pulley systems, the elevators, but the main function of the water wheel was to turn the millstone. Now we've 2 millstones here, one just on my right hand side and one just behind you there over my left hand corner. And these large round wheels are made of granite. And what we would do is we'd bring in the barley and the malt, we'll put that through the millstone and grind it down into a flour. And that flour is called grist. So you might have heard the term grist to the mill, and that's where that's coming from. So now we've made a grist flour. If we only use malted barley in the mix, that's what's the basis of a malt whisky. So a malt whisky will be made from 100% malted barley. But for most of our whisky, we'll use a mix of malted with unmalted barley. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that whisky style when we get to distillation. So we're quite unique in distilleries in doing that. So we now have a grist flour, and we're going to bring that now to the brew house. And on our way to the brew house, we're going to go through the left-hand side here. And if you take a look sharp left, you'll see a stationary beam engine. And it was bought in 1834, and again it was made just outside Manchester in England. And the reason why a lot of heavy equipment would have came into Ireland from the UK or from Britain is because they had gone through the Industrial Revolution. So a lot of heavy equipment came in from Britain. The steam engine that you're going to see was bought in 1834, and in 1834 it cost £800. Now in today's money, anyone like to have a guess at the value of that one?
A million?
You're close.
Yeah.
2 million, yeah? So 2 million euros. So it was a huge investment, but it meant then there was power guaranteed all year round. So you'll see that now on the left-hand side as we walk through, and we're going to make our way into the brew house.
Next door. This is the old. This is the.
And take a spot over on this side here. So I guess you take it, yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So I can get everybody in this section in here in front of me so you can see the screen behind me also. Yeah, it's a bit warmer if you're standing there.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Watch it.
Are we all in?
Yeah.
So I might get you to
No
move a little bit
building.
further so you can see the screen behind me. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the brew house. And behind me here, this vessel is called a mash tun. So we've made our flour, our grist flour, and we put that into the mash tun. Now you'll see what's going to happen here in a moment. We're going to add water to this at about 64, 65 degrees. And we're going to turn and rake and stir and agitate this for around 5 hours. So it's like having a big bowl of breakfast cereal and stirring it up for 5 hours. We're going to get all the goodness from inside the grain into liquid form. But more importantly, what we're doing here is we're converting the starches in the grain into fermentable sugars. Now after 5 hours, we'll separate the grain from the liquid. We don't need the grain anymore, we just want this lovely sugary liquid, and we will drain off this from the mash tun. The used up grain, you'll see it now in a moment in powder form. This will go back to the farmers. This is rich in protein, and it will be used for an animal feed, and it's very good for feeding cattle. So when you leave here today, if you see any cows in the field near the distillery, they are always the happiest cattle in Ireland. They always got the best
sure.
leftovers. So that's taken aside. We have this lovely sugary liquid, we call it the wort. And we transfer that into these vessels up here. They're called washbacks or fermentation vessels. They take 45,000 gallons each, which is 207,000 litres. We add some yeast to this, and when we add yeast, that will start fermentation, and this will take 80 hours to do. And after 80 hours, we will have what we call beer. We call it wash, but it's going to be at a strength of 10% by volume or 20 US proof. So it's going to be like a strong beer. That's why we call it beer. Now, if we were a brewery, we could now probably look at selling beer at this stage, because the process in brewing and distilling is quite similar up to this stage. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this beer or wash, it's 10% in strength, and we're going to bring that to distillation. So that's our next stage. So we're going to make our way down towards the still house, and we'll head around by the customs office. Have you all got your passports, yeah?
Are you actually using these?
No, we're not, no.
they're
All
just
production
demonstrating.
is next door, and you'll see when we go outside here, you'll see the new distillery over to the left-hand side.
And this building is dated?
1825. So from 1825 up until 1975.
I see.
I suppose the barrel just soaked it over the years.
I think he has little whiskey
Yeah.
singing.
Jameson family still involved in
No, they're not. The last of them would have been descendants that were just board members back in the 1960s, but there's nobody left. There is two sisters that are descendants of the Jameson family living in Waterford. They're now striving here, but they would be descendants down to the land, but they wouldn't have been involved in the company. No. That's the question. So, ladies and gentlemen, on my right-hand side, you can see the customs office. And years ago, and even today, all distilleries and the new distilleries just over the wall next door will have an involvement with the customs. because wherever in Ireland whiskey is made, tax and duty has to be paid. And years ago, the customs would come out of their office and they used to weigh every barrel of whiskey and they'd be checking the quantities that would be made. They also used to take a sample of the whiskey and they would